So, Alex, what are dreams?
Well, dreams are out-of-body experiences, plain and simple. And a dream very seldom goes to the past. It usually goes to the future. But sometimes, if it does go to the past, it's because of a truth that's trying to make itself known to you about where you have been, what you have been, and why you have been. Therefore, dreams which are highly rememberable are things that really did happen to you once. Some dreams can be futuristic, and they could be things that are going to come up for you, opportunities. But remember, we cannot recreate the past. The past is or was. And the only point for knowing it is a point of reference on where you're going. The most important one I ever had was the one of being an adult man of about the age of 30, riding in this cart on the way to the guillotine. I remember that what was threatening to me was what was happening on the sides of the road with people throwing things and yelling at us and so forth. I can remember the smell of the grease on the axles, the sound of it going over cobblestones and everything. And we get to the guillotine. I was marched up to the steps, and I suddenly all fear disappeared. And they tied me down to this plank and put me under the blade. And the next thing I knew, I was floating upward and watching my head drop in the basket. And that dream would repeat itself several times, even in a night, during periods where I thought, I will never survive this. Whatever it is, I've reached the end of the line. And what it was to show me that you never die. Your body dies, but you don't. And that's one of the reasons that I have remembered things like being eaten by a spider.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I remembered horrible things that happened, being burnt at the stake. I still cannot stand the smell of barbecued meat. I mean, this makes me gag. But the fact is, there are certain things which you take out of a dream, which tells you something not to do or something not to be afraid of. Mm. Now, the other thing I want to say about all this, dreams can have to do with reincarnation. My favorite story, and this is verified. Queen Elizabeth I was a contemporary of Shakespeare. Out of the plays that he wrote about history, he usually wrote the history of such and so and whatever. But he wrote a play about Richard II called The Tragedy of King Richard II, who was a monarch playboy, didn't like doing anything serious about being a king, but he liked having a good time. He basically fiddled and friddled around, and the nobles that were his contemporaries rose up against him. And in the end, he was murdered. He was thrown into a keg of wine. He was drowned in a keg of wine. So the Queen has watched this play, and all of a sudden, after the play is over, they go to ask Her Majesty if everything's all right, if it's time to leave, whatever it is. And she's sitting there in a state of shock. She's like, hello? Mm. She's not there. They ask her, was it not pleasing to Your Majesty, or was it a play, not well performed? And finally she says something. She says, know ye not, I am King Richard II. Mm. What does that say? Mm. Mm. Come back as a woman to be the best monarch probably the kingdom ever had. She had to do it over again. He had to do it as a she, because he was very feminine and all that. Had to do it as a woman.
So we keep coming back.
Well, I think you keep coming back as long as you have some useful purpose. I think when your purpose is only to stay alive or to make babies, I think that's a purpose that's easily transferred from one generation to another. But I think that if your evolution brings you to the place where you can have children who will be raised to do great things, that's the reason, maybe. Mm-hmm. I'm writing a book. Also, I have only the French translation of it. I gave it in English, but it was translated into French. It's called Reunited Again, Réunis à nouveau. Why are we together again with anyone?
Again, so now we're talking about soulmates. Yeah,
Twin souls. Yeah, and twin flames.
How would you define twin flames
Well, twin flames,
as opposed to soulmate?
well, soulmates, Bryce I used to make a little joke. She would say, you have to be careful because you might end up with, instead of your soulmate, you may end up with a cellmate.
Soulmate or cellmate?
The soulmates are people that you're back together, and it's a little bit like Siamese twins. You have to be there together, but you don't like each other necessarily.
Mm.
And so there's a lot of competition and a lot of...
And yet everybody wants their soulmate.
Well, there's
the
really
word they
what
latch on to.
Yeah, what they really want is a twin flame.
Yeah.
Because that's the uninterrupted transmission of true love and passion as a flame is. And so there's 3 recordings that I have out on my channel. It's with, was it Maria Giovanna? I forget who is the one who gave this teaching. What is the difference between the twin flame, soulmate, or what was the other one I think we said?
I think we're just on those 2.
Okay. But anyway, the fact is, it's all about coming back to be with somebody to finish up some karma or to do something, to make something, to right something that was wrong. And it's not an easy thing. And people who have the twin flame know it, they recognize it, and it burns very brightly while they're together, but it's not the last relationship they may have. Queen Victoria had a twin flame relationship with Prince Albert. After he died, she went on to have several twin flame relationships. See the movie with Judi Dench called Mrs. Brown. That was another relationship. And the last one was Victoria and Abdul.
Yes. Actually, I saw Victoria and Abdul.
It was beautiful.
It was wonderful. What about our spirit guides? We all have our personal spirit guides, our gatekeepers.
Yeah.
And when people start to learn about them, were these spirit guides, these gatekeepers, actual people that we knew in previous incarnations?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
In fact, Bryce Charles never been a human.
Oh.
She is actually what's left of a star that disintegrated, and supernova. Bryce Charles' explanation of it all was, somebody said to Bryce Charles, "What have you been?" She said, "Well, I'm more like an angel than I am like a star itself, because the star ended, and I'm the soul of that star which ended." And she says, and I call myself Bright Star because when stars end, they are very at their brightest before they enter into the supernova. She said, and they said, "Well, how old are you?" And she says, "I'm 13 and a half. Cuteness, right? Why 13 and a half? She says, "Well, I always thought that 12 was too young, 14 was too old, so I took 13 and a half or something like that." I mean, she makes some sort of silly thing to say she can take anything. She said that lying about your age is the one thing everyone has a right to do.
And
because the question is, are you asking about the age of my body or the age of me as my soul?
Right. And tell us about Anatkwa.
Anatkwa really was an Indian, Native American. And he belonged to, I think he was an Iroquois, I forget which one is his. But he's given a little bit of his history on those recorded things. And he he calls himself an elder, a wise elder, not a chief. Whether he had a chieftain status, I don't know, but he refers to himself as a wise elder. And he is there basically as he was like a tribal luminary, I would say. And he's learned English. He's learned a lot by listening to other spirits. But he is basically one who is a message giver. He said, "I'm the mailman. I don't write the messages, I deliver them."
How did you first become aware of Anatkwa?
Well, Anatkwa began to manifest fairly early in my development. I knew I had to. Another had an Indian guy who never spoke. His name was Brown Bear, but kind of a big earthy, creature, protector. But Anatkwa came in and started speaking. I couldn't remember exactly when, but it was soon after I started channeling. Anatkwa arrived.
Do you remember the first time you heard yourself recorded with a spirit guide speaking through you?
Oh, I mean, that I've heard over a number of years. I have heard someone else using my physical voice.
Yeah. What was it like for you? Did you, when you first listened back, because you go into a full trance, almost really like falling asleep.
Yeah, exactly.
And then someone recorded you for the first time.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about the absolute first time.
Okay.
No, but I knew what it was like to hear somebody like my teacher Agatha talk as Agatha and then have the spirits come through as somebody else. So I wasn't shocked by that.
Were you shocked the first time Agatha went into trance? Was she the first trance that you saw?
She was the first actual medium that I sat with, yes, and Clifford Bryce was the second. And they both were equally amazing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, as I said, it's like listening to somebody playing the piano, then somebody goes over and sits down and plays the piano, and it's a different sound. It's the same instrument. So, I mean, my approach to channeling, as far as how I did it and how I reacted to it, was basically like listening to different people playing musical instruments. Nothing more, nothing less about that.
Do you meet people in your casual day-to-day life, whether it's a person, a bank teller or someone you're at the supermarket with, and you say to yourself as you walk away, this person doesn't know that they're psychic?
Oh, all the time.
Oh, do you ever tell them?
No, unless they really want to know or something, unless they ask me about what I do. I mean, anybody who really wants to find that information out can chat me up a little bit, and I don't hide behind it.
Yeah. But you see it happen. Do you ever you recognize that, wow, this person has potentiality to do something with this?
Well, I got that. Initially that I had lost the bank card and so forth, and I had to go over and reestablish a bank account. And I'm very close, have a very close spiritual connection with Russians. My roommate's is actually Polish and Russian. I've always liked them, but I don't like all of them. I happen to be a great believer in the destiny of Alexei Navalny to eventually be the head of Russia. I hope we'll pray for it. But this guy was a Russian, and we chatted a little bit, and I felt a kind of warmth with him. I didn't have all the proper identification, everything that he needed, but he says, you sound like a nice man. I'm going to do this for you anyway. So, I mean, we have this immediate connection as if we knew each other. And there's a recognition. I think recognition of when and where you've known a person is not always clear. But I've had it a lot with Russians. I've had it a lot with Indians and East.
These are prominent past lives of yours.
Oh, yeah, very, very much.
What about psychic awareness in children? Do you meet children where you see this spark in them? Do you tell the parent?
All the time. All the time. I think it's so there. But what's happened is the programming of children's minds with junk television is very dangerous. The public PBS, the public service broadcasters have very good programs for children, and the best, of course, the best ever was Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers was the greatest teacher of children that I have ever witnessed, and most people agree to that. And all of his material is still available. You can still order it. You can buy it. Anybody who doesn't own Mr. Rogers for the kids is really missing out on something. Parenting is also something that can be handed down for good or for worse. And it's true that in general, at least in our culture, boys are preferred to girls. And girls take a second-class status, as their mothers do. So the relationship to women is, interestingly enough, closer between daughters and fathers than daughters and mothers, because mothers tend to judge their daughters very harshly and want their daughters to be as good or better than they are if they're not competing with them. But they always puts that pressure, as fathers do to their sons. They want the sons to be successful, and they don't let the sons really bloom. So I feel that if a child is a girl and she shows any talent of any kind, the father will stand behind that. He doesn't got a daughter. If she's got talent, at least there's hope for something. It's like, you know. With boys, there's a lot of pressure on them for success too.
Within families, we see this, like where your mother was psychic, and so there's this.
My mother was psychic.
Your mother was psychic.
Absolutely.
Do you believe it's something that now is in the genetic code? I mean, if your mother was psychic, is it, and then you are, and I've heard people who are third, fourth generation intuitives.
I do think it runs in family, just like musicality does. I think you get composers. Bach had 21 children, and then they all went out and had a lot of children. And there's generations of people who are artists and musicians. And yes, I think it is. I think like attracts like. I think, people who are attracted to each other that are well married produce children who are well educated.
Mm-hmm.
I really do.
So there's the idea of soul contracts.
I don't know that idea. That's put into words. I don't know soul contract.
So would you say when you refer to people having a purpose to being together, incarnating, there's a purpose, and that even though there could be even an unpleasant experience, the idea that someone says, "Well, I had these 10 disastrous years with these 3 people."
Mm-hmm. Well,
and now it's popular to say, "Well, you got a soul contract."
I just think it's karma. But I mean, if you want to, I don't think they sign any official papers before they reincarnate. Contract is, well, it's obviously nothing that I recognize as standard language.
Okay.
There's a lot of people make up language to say what it is.
Now, here we are in 2021.
Yes.
And as opposed to 40 years ago, now you see really quite, I won't say just everyone, but you will see a regular person wearing a crystal around their neck, or you can buy sage in the supermarket.
Well,
or you can,
it's become a part of our current renovated sense about talismanic values of stones and of any vegetables or anything. There are people who, will wear a certain flower because it brings especially good vibration to them. And I think that's a question of affinity. Personally, I always detested the smell of burning sage.
Mm.
It's really chokers to me. I prefer to use frankincense or myrrh or something. I mean, there's a lot of alternatives.
Yeah.
But
you're seeing the new age, which is actually a very old age. You're seeing it coming more into mainstream society.
No, I think so.
Yeah.
No, I agree that. And people like, I see people wearing beautiful feather necklaces or things that are made of unusual subject. I saw a special on television last night about this Native American guy who'd learned to be this wonderful worker of stones and how he could fit them together and do, kind of like mosaics with stones of turquoise and I think there were different colored stones and he had all put together, and they were like being like little pictures in stones. I mean, it was exquisite work, and that was really because he learned from a lot of other things that he observed, and he applied it to what he could do with stones.
So these stones and these crystals, we can call them amplifiers or resonators.
Yes.
Energy.
Yes, absolutely.
Particular area, even on the planet. So
yeah.
What are your feelings about vortexes or energy vortexes?
I think vortexes do exist. I think there's no question about it that there's some places on the planet which have a particular type of growth that takes place there, and others places don't have it. There are certain places where certain plants thrive and others do not. There's certain places, whether it's a forest or whatever it is. I think that what's happened is a lot of the planet where they've neglected the maintenance of the garden of, the Garden of Eden, we'll call it that if you like, the original garden. If that's not maintained, then it may become it may not be an oasis, it may become a desert. We see the what they call desertification of many places on the planet which were once very green and very fertile. Planetary change is climate change is of extreme importance because people are wanting to go move to Mars, but Mars may be a planet that was like the Earth that burnt out, that it actually had habitable places. And that's what I believe in Venus. It's impossible to live in that climate, but it shows signs of having had water, of having said certain things. So you can say, well, how is it that Mars could support life at one point and after another point not? Well, what do you think can happen to this Earth? This Earth could come to the point where it no longer supports habitable mammals and plants.
So now we're talking about a linear timeline.
Yes.
The spirit guides come and they speak about this concept of simultaneous time.
The watch, the clock, this never moves, only the hands do. Time never moves. Time is, it's everywhere, and only thing that moves is what moves through time. Time is the universe of any size, shape, or galaxy of any size or shape. It's simply there. What's in it evolves, not time. What time contains moves, and the more times you go around and around and around, you're supposed to, with each rotation, have more experience, have more knowledge, etc. If you could take the wisdom of time is that time watches everything. It doesn't do everything. Everybody does what happens in time, but time observes. The face of the clock is observing the hands move. So time learns by the movement of the hands. We come to a philosophical question. Why does this happen? Well, if God is the universe and the universe is God, and if the universe looks a bit like the face of the clock, or it looks like this ball here, why does it happen? What was the purpose? Well, one thing we can know, if God knew all the answers, then the whole thing would be redundant. It would be purposeless. To go through it all again, if you know it already and you don't, and there's no reason to do it again, why do it again? If you don't know it already and you have more to learn, yes, it's worth doing, because every continual movement is re-educating the whole. So we come to two philosophical questions, which are the end of all philosophy. The first is, so what? And the last is, why bother? So what and why bother? And that's the ultimate question about anything. You could say, when the end of this galaxy is over, you could say, well, so what and why bother? Well, it's over, but something was learned by it, or the Creator wouldn't have bothered even making it in the first place.
So we're living inside an idea.
We're living inside of God's creation mentality. You say everything is made in God's image, but image is a shortening of the word imagination. If God can't see it, God can't create it. If you're a painter and you can't see it, you can't create it. If you're a chef and you don't know what you're going to cook, you can't cook it. And you can say, well, you can improvise. Well, to a certain extent. Yes, I can't say that everything is made according to some absolute, shall we say, logical formula. However, the illogical is also something that makes sense to people like You know, Mae West in this movie says to these kids, and she's going to teach them about mathematics. She says, "Listen, I'm going to teach you how things work in mathematics. 2 + 2 = 4, and 5 if you know how to work it." Einstein heard this. Every guy in Einstein's era loved Mae West. She was the first person to really show women how to be sexy. Said, "That's it. Out of the box thinking, out of the box thinking." So we don't know how to work it yet. But when we do, 2 + 2 will equal more than 4.